Okay, good day, grade 10s. Again, I'm going to give it a little while to let any latecomers join, and then I'm just going to continue where we left off last week. Okay, so hello to everyone who's here already, and thanks for joining the lesson. I'll be with you guys shortly.
Very nice.
Okay, I'm going to start now. Seems like those who want to join are here. Others can just fall in later. Okay, so like I said, we're going to continue with animal tissue. So where we left off last time is we discussed, or let me actually just jump to it. So there's just the definition again. If you were forgetting, here's just how everything is organized, and we're busy here with the tissue organization. Okay, and then where we left off is we've discussed epithelial tissue, and we started with connective tissue. We've done blood and bone, and now we're going to complete the rest of the connective tissue, as well as muscle tissue and nervous tissue. Okay, so there's quite a lot to get through, so I'm just going to jump in. Okay, so if we jump ahead to cartilage, so this is the third type of connective tissue. So just to quickly give you an overview of connective tissue. Connective tissue is tissue that binds other tissues together. Okay, so for example, your epithelial tissue is, for example, let's say your skin, and then underneath your skin, you are going to have a layer of connective tissue that connects your skin with, say, your muscle or well, not directly to your bone, but to the tissue underneath your skin. Okay, so connective tissue connects tissues together. And connective tissue consists of three elements. Okay, not all connective tissues will have all three, but in general, there's three elements to connective tissue. There's the matrix, which is basically like the cement, the thing that everything else is connected to. Then there are the fibers, which are basically, I use the example of when you're building a big building, then you have reinforced concrete. You build it with reinforced concrete. And the cement is the matrix, and then those metal bars that run through the concrete, that's like the fibers. And then obviously also you have the cells. So the cells in the concrete example might be the stones or the bricks that you use. Okay, so you're in the connective tissue, you'll also have obviously cells because it is a living tissue. Okay, so if you look at this example over here, let's use this. So here you can see the cells. Okay, the area over here, that is the matrix. And then cartilage will also actually have a couple of fibers. So the fibers will literally just run, okay, everywhere across the and through the tissue. Okay, so it's basically like a network that keeps everything together. So those are the three elements that you will find in all connective tissue. So let's now look at cartilage specifically. So cartilage consists of a tough, rubbery matrix. Okay, so if you remember back to when we discussed the bone, okay, the bone is a hard, calcified matrix, whereas the matrix for the cartilage is, okay, still solid, but more rubbery. And then it consists of chondrin. Okay, chondrin is the material that the matrix is made up of. Where in bone, it was made up of the minerals like calcium and phosphorus. For cartilage, it consists of chondrin. Then in the cartilage tissue, you will also have these areas called lacunae. So just gonna draw around it again. Okay, so again, this is a word we discussed in bone tissue. Okay, and lacunae is just fluid-filled areas that houses the cells. Okay, so in the case of the bones, we had the lacunae that was filled with osteocytes. And in, with cartilage, the lacunae is filled with chondrocytes. Okay, so you'll see there that the oocytes is part of both words, and that refers to the fact that these are cells. Okay, so chondrocytes are cartilage cells. Osteocytes are bone cells. Okay, so the lacunae is fluid-filled areas that houses the chondrocytes, which is the cells, the living cells of the cartilage. Okay, then it also contains fibers. So these lines that I drew here, that would be the fibers. So the original diagram didn't have fibers. And this is because some cartilage does not have fibers. So it is not in all cartilage, but most cartilage does have fibers. Okay, and the fibers can either be collagen or elastin. Okay, so we'll briefly discuss these two in the next slide, but they come up a few times when we discuss the different fibers that we find in connective tissue. So just remember these two names, but we will refer to them again later. And then, just like with the bone, the whole outside of the area is covered with a membrane called the perichondrium. Okay, but again, this isn't technically the zoomed in microscopic picture that we see over here. You can't really see the perichondrium necessarily. It will be the membrane around the whole cartilage. So for example, in between your vertebra and your back, you have cartilage so that the vertebrae don't bump against each other. So that whole section, the whole disc in between your vertebra will be covered with perichondrium. Okay, but the inside is, you won't find any perichondrium there. Okay, there it will just look like this diagram over here. Okay, which I've scribbled over. Okay, so, but hopefully on the next slide you understand it a bit better. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, again, when I draw, for some reason, I cannot move to the next slide. Okay, let me just quickly figure this out. Okay, I'm going to try and limit my drawing because apparently it doesn't want to play along when I draw on the diagram. Okay, so let's quickly have a look at different kinds of cartilage. Okay, first, what is the function of cartilage? Well, in general, the function of all cartilage is either to reduce the friction or to provide a bit of structure or to absorb shock so that the bones don't break or to give flexibility. So I'll quickly explain all four of these examples. So in between your, let's say your elbow joint, okay, if you move your elbow up and down the whole time, then if there was nothing in between the bones would be grinding against each other. And if you've ever taken a hard object like a rock and rubbed two rocks together, then you would know that it creates quite a bit of friction, and the friction results in some pieces of the rocks breaking off and becoming dust. Okay, and that would be a problem in your bone because your bones are also hard, and if they rub against each other, that would be a problem. So in order to reduce this, you have cartilage in between your bones that prevent this rubbing and this friction, which will damage the bones. So here you can see on the right-hand side, just an example of how cartilage would look like. This is in your knee. Okay, so the cartilage that you have there in between the bones. Okay, so it's smooth and it reduces the friction to prevent damage to the bones. Then it also provides structure. For example, here in your nose and in your ear, where bones would be too hard, okay, you might have some cartilage that provides some structure. So for example, your nose. Okay, so in order for your nose to stay open and to be a rigid structure but still flexible, it makes use of cartilage instead of bone. And then also acts as a shock absorber. So here you can see in between these vertebral discs, so that's in your back. Okay, here you have the intervertebral disc, which will absorb the shock so that these bones don't go crashing into each other and cause a lot of damage. Okay, so very important for that. And then also provides flexibility. So for example, in your rib cage, your ribs obviously move in and out the whole time. And you don't have a joint there where the ribs are. So you don't have, so like your fingers and your elbow and your knees can easily move, freely movable joints. You don't have that in your ribs. What you actually have there is cartilage that connects the ribs so that the ribs can easily expand and contract again, or when you inhale and exhale, so that the ribs can move out and in again without causing stress on the ribs. Okay, so it allows cartilage allows flexibility. Okay, so just remember these 4 functions. They're highlighted in red. Okay, so that's what why we need cartilage all throughout the body. Okay, then the cartilage tissue. So I think, did I skip over? Yeah, apparently. Okay, so we do discuss cartilage a bit later, in more depth a bit later on when we do the skeleton. For now, okay, we just want to look at how does the cartilage look like. Okay, so, and what is its main functions, and how would we describe the structure? So here we have the diagram. Okay, so the things that we've discussed. So here you have the lacunae, which is the fluid-filled area. So can you see my mouse? So the fluid-filled area that houses the chondrocytes. Okay, so here you can see, here's an example of 1 chondrocyte. Thank you, Xander. 3 chondrocytes and 2 chondrocytes. Okay, so it can vary depending on, it varies how many chondrocytes is in each lacunae, but the point is it houses a number of chondrocytes. And remember, the chondrocytes are the cells of the cartilage. Okay, so the cartilage cells. And then everywhere in between is the chondrin, or the matrix. Okay, so that is the tough, rubbery matrix that everything is suspended in. Okay, and then not drawn here. Okay, you will also find some fibers. Okay, but since we don't find fibers in all cartilage, we don't draw them here. But some cartilage definitely has a lot of fibers, but we'll discuss that when we do the skeleton. Okay, then we move on to the 4th kind of connective tissue. Okay, Xander, how do I take away your line there? Thank you. So the 4th kind of connective tissue is dense connective tissue. Okay, but basically it is the tendons and the ligaments in your body. Okay, so tendons and ligaments we discuss quite a lot. If you're not familiar with tendons and ligaments yet, okay, you might have heard about it before. So your ligaments is wherever your body needs to join 2 bones together and hold them tightly together, you will find ligaments. Okay, so for example, very common ligaments that people injure in sport would be in their knees. Okay, so your knee is a very complex joint where a lot of forces have to go through, and in order to keep everything tight together, it makes use of ligaments. Whereas your tendons connects muscle to bone. Okay, so for example, any kind of muscle in the body needs to somehow be connected to the bone. The muscle cannot directly attach to the bone. Okay, so how it does that is through tendons. So tendons connects your muscle to your bone. And these 2 tissues are very similar, but they have a few differences. So for example, because ligaments join bone to bone, they need to be able to stretch a bit, okay, because the bone can't stretch. So in order to provide a bit of elasticity, the ligaments need to be able to stretch. However, tendons are connected to muscle, and muscle can move, can contract and relax. So in this case, the tendons don't need to be able to stretch because the muscle will do the stretching. Okay, so tendons are very stiff, okay, and they can't stretch. Okay, and how this, the reason they are slightly different is down to their structure. So let's go back up and look at the structure again. Okay, so in general, dense connective tissue, so tendons and ligaments, consists mainly of densely packed parallel fibers. Okay, so a lot of fibers. Dense connective tissue consists mainly of fibers. So you can see some of the fibers here. Okay, there are a small amount of matrix and cells. Okay, so mostly fibers and very little matrix and cells. Then tendons have mainly collagen fibers, and ligaments have mainly elastin fibers. Okay, now what's the difference between the two? Difference is collagen is white and inelastic, and elastin is yellow and elastic. Okay, so it's quite easy to remember because elastin sounds like elastic. So elastin is elastic, and then that must mean that collagen is inelastic. Okay, so that's the main thing that you have to remember. Elastin, elastic, collagen, inelastic. Okay, elastin is found in ligaments because ligaments must be able to stretch, and collagen is found in tendons because tendons can't stretch. Okay, so this is very basic things that you just have to remember. Okay, so make sure you understand tendons and ligaments. Okay, tendons mainly consist of collagen and can't stretch. Ligaments mainly consist of elastin and can stretch. Okay, so hope you remember that, but we will do that again when we do the skeleton. We'll recap all of this. Okay, then the last type of connective tissue is areolar connective tissue. Okay, so areolar connective tissue we've referred to before. When we discussed the different types of epithelium, we discussed areolar connective tissue, and we said it's a very loose connective tissue, that connects the epithelium to the underlying layers. Okay, so here again, the structure, it is loose and irregular. It has a loose and irregular arrangement. So you can see over here, okay, there's no rhyme or reason to how this looks. Okay, it just looks like a bunch of fibers flopped on top of each other. Okay, and that's basically what areolar connective tissue is. Okay, so it's very loose, which gives it a lot of flexibility and play so that it doesn't, so for example, your skin. Okay, your skin can move around a lot. Okay, if you put your hands or your hand on top of your other hand, okay, you can feel that your skin can move around a lot. And this is because the connective tissue isn't very rigid. Okay, so it doesn't bind it tightly together. Okay, it just binds it loosely together. Okay, and that is because of the areolar connective tissue. Okay, so what else do we find there? We find a jelly-like matrix. Okay, so again, the matrix is very jelly-like, so even less stiff than the cartilage, and it contains yellow elastin and white collagen fiber. So it contains both elastin and collagen fibers. Okay, so I hope you're still following along. Okay, so earlier we discussed the elastin and the collagen. Okay, so now again it comes up. Okay, so in areolar connective tissue you find both those fibers. And then the function, okay, basically just to bind epithelium to underlying tissue. Okay, that's the main function of the areolar connective tissue. It binds the top layer to the lower layers. Okay, so I hope that all made sense. If not, okay, don't worry too much. Okay, the more you go over it, the more, okay, these things will start to sink in. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the muscle tissue. So the grade 12s are busy walking outside of my class, so I'm just going to speak a bit louder. But I'll quickly, before I start, just give you a quick overview. So here you can see the 3 types of muscle tissue that we discuss. Here you have the cardiac tissue, the heart muscle. Then you have the skeletal muscle. So those are the muscles that you use every day to move things and move yourself around. Okay, so the muscles attached to your skeleton. And then the last one is the muscles you find in your organs. Okay, and these are called smooth muscle. Yeah, just going to wait for the matrix to pass before I move on. Okay, but just know, okay, we're going to look at these three different types of muscle tissues. Okay, sorry for that. Seems like most of them are fast. So we're going to continue. Okay, so okay, again, here's just the three types of muscle tissues. Okay, let's look at the first type of muscle tissue, skeletal muscle. Okay, skeletal muscle is also sometimes called striated muscle. And this refers to the stripes that we see here, okay, if we look at the skeletal muscle. Okay, so it looks kind of like there's stripes running across the muscle, and that's why it's called striated muscle. Okay, so where do we find skeletal muscle? Well, we find them attached to the skeleton. Okay, so attached to bones. And then how does the muscles look like? Well, they consist of these long cylinders. Okay, we call them muscle fibers. So if you look here on the right-hand side, okay, so it's these very long muscle fibers, and they run parallel to each other. So it consists of long cylindrical cells called muscle fibers. The muscle fibers are striated, okay, so striped, and because they have light and dark sections. Now there's a long explanation for why there is the light and the dark sections. I'm not going to go into that in class. I might elaborate a bit on that, but just know that the muscles are striated. Okay. Then also very important, skeletal muscle is multi-nucleated. Okay, so multi meaning multiple, more than one, and nucleated referring to the nucleus. Okay, so skeletal muscle have many nuclei, more than one nuclei. So you can see even here in this micrograph over here. So this is a picture taken through a microscope. Okay, so you can see that. So if we take the second one, okay, then there's two, maybe three nucleus just in this small section. Okay, and this picture will, okay, this muscle fiber will run a long way up and down still. Okay, it's a lot longer than this small section over here. Okay, so they have many nuclei in one cell. Okay, so you can see that this is quite a weird looking cell. Okay, compared to the blob animal cell that we drew and we looked at in the first term. Okay, this looks a lot different. Okay, so it's this long pencil-shaped cell, which looks a lot different than what we are used to. So that just shows you the variation and the specialization that we see amongst different tissues. Okay, so this cell looks a lot different than a nervous cell, which we will still look at, and looks a lot different than cuboidal epithelium, which we've already looked at. Okay, so important to note, okay, how all of these cells look very different, and because they look very different, they have very different functions. So let's get on to the function of the skeletal muscle. Okay, the function is locomotion. Basically, if we have to summarize all of it, it is, okay, function of your skeletal muscles is to help you move around. Okay, so explanation of locomotion, muscles voluntarily, okay, meaning you choose when you want to. So muscles voluntarily contract and relax to produce movement. Okay, so basically the function of skeletal muscle is to move. Okay, not just to move you, but also to move things, to move your limbs, okay, to move your body around in space. Okay, so that's skeletal muscle. Okay, here's just a kind of breakdown of how skeletal muscle comes together. Not going to spend time on this. Okay, just the important one to note here is this middle one, the muscle fiber. Okay, because that's the one that you have to know. Okay, but you can see that it actually is quite complex. Okay, it consists of a lot of things inside of each other that makes up bigger parts. Okay, but again, that's a long explanation, and the only thing you really have to know is this middle part. Okay, again, this is just the muscle fiber. Okay, don't worry too much about this. I might explain it a bit in class, but it's not something that I will ask. Okay, then what is important is the sketch for skeletal muscle or striated muscles. Okay, so here you have a couple of fibers, 4 fibers stacked on top of each other, just so that you get the idea of how they look together. Then the 2 important things here is the multiple nuclei per cell. Okay, so let's look at the top one. The top one has 1, 2, 3 nuclei just in this section of the cell. Okay, so multiple nuclei per cell, and then also the striped appearance. Okay, so the striations. Okay, so that's the important part about the skeletal muscle, okay, in this drawing. Okay, so basically you just draw, okay, a couple of lines on top of each other, indicate that they are different cells, and indicate the striped appearance and the nuclei inside of the, or multiple nuclei inside of each cell. Okay. This is if we were to take one of those fibers and we zoom in a bit more on it, okay, this is how that would look like. So you need to know this diagram as well. Okay, so there's a bit more detail in this one. Okay, but if you have a look at the previous one, it is basically just, okay, one of these fibers, okay, isolated and zoomed in a bit. Okay, so here once again, we see the multiple nuclei. Okay, we also see the striped effect. Okay, so here we have the dark band and the light band in between. And then, okay, some other aspects, like I said, we skimmed over this, so don't worry too much about this. But the membrane on the outside is called the sarcolemma. Okay, so that's the membrane on the outside of the muscle fiber. The inside of the muscle fiber is filled with sarcoplasm. Okay, so it's like the cytoplasm of the cell. Okay, but in this case, we call it the sarcoplasm. Okay, then, and each muscle fiber has many of these myofibrils. Okay, so these are smaller parts that make up the muscle cell. Okay, but again, like I said, we're not going to spend a lot of time on explaining the muscle fibers. Sorry, the myofibrils. So just know that each muscle fiber has many different or many myofibrils. Okay, so you need to know this diagram, but we focus more on the first one. Okay, so yeah, don't worry. You have to study it. Okay, but it's, yeah, I worry more about the first one than the second one. Okay. Okay, again, this is something that we're going to skip for now because it's a long explanation. But here, just for your interest, you can kind of see how your muscles contract. So if you zoom in even closer, okay, like really as close as you can zoom in on the muscles, okay, this is what you will see. Okay, so here you can see a muscle that is busy contracting. Obviously, this is a computer animation, but this is how the muscle actually works on the smallest level. Okay, so you have these little heads called myosin heads that bind to these actin filaments, and then they basically grab onto the filament and they drag it closer together. Okay, so that's quite interesting. I always find quite interesting in how this all comes together. But I just got a 10-minute warning, so I'm going to go ahead. Okay, next type of muscle tissue is the smooth muscle tissue. Okay, this is the muscle tissue that you find in your organs. Okay, so for example, in your stomach, okay, the muscles that make your stomach churn and help mix the food. Okay, that is smooth muscles. And the big difference here is you don't have control over these muscles. Okay, you cannot tell your muscle in your stomach to, okay, break down the food for you. Okay, it happens automatically. Okay, so it is involuntary. The previous one, skeletal muscle, was voluntary. Smooth muscle is involuntary. Okay, so where do we find this? In your intestines and also in areas like the iris of your eye. Okay, but we'll discuss this now briefly at the end. But mainly, okay, we focus on the effect it has in your intestines. Then how does it look like? Well, first of all, it doesn't have that long cylinder shape. It more has like a spindle shape. So don't really know how to explain it, but it's got a bulge in the middle, and then it tapers off to the ends. So as you can see here in this diagram. Okay, so it's got a thick area in the middle and then thin parts towards the end. Okay, so we call this an elongated spindle-shaped cell. Differences, more differences between this and the skeletal muscle. It is not striated. There's no stripes here. And it only has one nucleus per cell, so uninucleated. Okay, so make sure you understand the difference here so that you can easily identify them if I give you the diagrams and I ask you, okay, what type of muscle is this and why? Okay, the functions of smooth muscle is muscles contract involuntarily. Okay, very important. So you don't have control over it. And two reasons why we have smooth muscle is to facilitate peristalsis in your intestines. Okay, so peristalsis is when you swallow something down your esophagus. So you chew your food and you swallow it. Okay, the action that pushes that food down the intestines is called peristalsis. Okay, so we discussed this in grade 9 actually, and we do it again in grade 11. Okay, just know, okay, peristalsis in your intestines is when your intestines moves food through it. And then also, okay, we said smooth muscle, we find it in the eye, and what its function there is to regulate the amount of light that enters the eye. So for example, if you sit in your dark room the whole day, and then around midday you go outside to go fetch something, then all of a sudden all of that sun hits you, and then your eyes take a while to adjust to the sun. Okay, but your eyes do that automatically. You don't have control over it. Okay, it just takes a while for it to happen. So this is another example of smooth muscle that acts involuntarily. Okay, here's the diagram for smooth muscle. Okay, so smooth muscle, so here you see the tapered ends. Okay, so the spindle-shaped cells, and they're not always connected together. So you might sometimes see these gaps in between them. Okay, and the label's fairly simple. You have the nucleus, so one nucleus per cell, and then again you have the sarcolemma on the outside, the membrane, and the sarcoplasm on the inside. Okay, so the cytoplasm. Okay, so make sure you can label this and draw this, and also identify it. Very important. Then the last type of muscle tissue is the cardiac muscle. Okay, so cardiac muscle, the heart muscle. So where do we find this? In the walls of the heart. Okay, so if you look here, this kind of looks like a steak. Okay, and in fact, I don't know if we're going to have a chance this year to dissect the heart. I'll still try and do it. But then you will see how the heart actually looks just like steaks do. Okay, so this is muscle tissue. Okay, your heart is a big muscle. So what is the difference between the cardiac muscle and the other two muscles? Okay, well, there's some similarities, some differences. So firstly, it is striated. Okay, so like the skeletal muscle, okay, the cardiac muscle is striated, so it has stripes. But unlike the skeletal muscle and more like the smooth muscle, it is uninucleated, so it has one nucleus per cell. Okay, so remember this, okay, these two, it's in one way it's like the skeletal muscle, in another way it is like the smooth muscle. And then a big difference that is unique to cardiac muscle is these muscle bridges that you find between the cells. So if you have a look at this diagram over here, you can see, like, unlike the skeletal muscle, which is just these straight lines, the cardiac muscle is more kind of wiggly lines, and the muscles connect to each other with these, what we call muscle bridges. Okay, so the lines split off from each other basically. Okay, and this is very unique to the cardiac muscle. Okay, so they kind of, the muscle fibers are connected together through muscle bridges. Okay, and this, the reason this is important is this allows the muscle to all work as a unit. Okay, so for your heart, it's very important to work together as a unit. Otherwise, your heart would beat irregularly, and that would create problems for your blood flow. Okay, so very important for your heart to all work together as a unit, and it does this because of these muscle bridges. Okay, the function, okay, it contracts and relaxes to circulate blood. Okay, that's the main function. Okay, so if I ask you for the function, this is what you write. But Sorry. But then just very briefly, you should know that the heart muscle shows automatism. Okay, so meaning it works independently of your decisions and your actions. Okay, so you don't have to tell your heart to beat, basically. Okay, so it's similar to smooth muscle, okay, where it acts independently or involuntarily. Okay, but the main point here is the function is to contract and relax to circulate blood. Okay, the main function of the cardiac muscle. Okay, there's the diagram. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. You see the striations, you see the muscle bridges, and you see the one nucleus per cell. So this one is a bit confusing. So I see there's a few extra nuclei in here. Okay, but the main differentiating factor here is the muscle bridges. Okay, okay, I'm very quickly going to do nervous tissue. If I do get cut off, it's fine. Okay, so I'm going to try and get as far as possible, but you don't have to join in again. Okay, so let's see how much of the nervous tissue I can do. So nervous tissue is basically your brain and all of the nerves that run to the different parts of your body. Okay, that's nervous tissue. Okay, nerve cells are called neurons. Okay, so a single nerve cell is called a neuron. We find this in your central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord. Okay, and then also in your peripheral nervous system, which is the nerves. Okay, so this is a lot of extra information just to give you a bit of context, but basically you just need to know that nervous tissue is called neurons and it is found in the brain, then the spinal cord and nerves. Okay, nerves are what runs from your brain to, let's say, your bicep muscle. Okay, that is a nerve. So the structure of the nervous tissue is it has a main cell body, and then off that cell body, okay, I'm going to get cut off in 1 minute. I'm going to end this meeting. Quickly join in. It's just going to be 5 minutes. Okay, so there's a bit more to discuss than I thought. Okay, so quickly exit this meeting and then join again just for 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to end it here.